When Sam took over and landed the airplane, he was not aware of the fact that he had only one landing gear. We went down the runway with the left wing skidding down the concrete runway. The friction caused our parachutes to catch on fire and fill the airplane with smoke. Then our radio operator, Russ Hadley, passed out from the smoke that filled the airplane. Fortunately, I was able to pick him up and dump him out of a window that was open. Originally, what was standard on B-24 was there were 4 officers and 6 enlisted men. The officers consisted of the pilot, the co-pilot, the navigator, and the bombardier. Toward the end of our training in the States, the Army Air Corps found itself very short on radar operators. So they reassigned our bombardier to this duty. To fill the bombardier gap, I was given a 2-month course in the duties of bombardier in order to perform his duties. A bombardier has many duties, but his main responsibility was dropping the bombs on target. Some of these duties included being the commanding officer of the 6 enlisted men on the crew. My initial duties were that of a navigator. It was the navigator's responsibility to keep up with our location and to give the pilot proper instructions as to how to get to our destination. The navigator also had some other duties, such as monitoring the fuel supply in the airplane. When I took over the duties of the bombardier, I had enough to do to keep me very busy. As the bombardier, I was now responsible for the accomplishment of the duties of the enlisted men, being sure that they were at the proper post, particularly during combat. The bombardier also had to be sure that the bombs were ready to be dropped when necessary, and to make sure that all the bombs came out. Our airplane typically carried 10,000 pounds of bombs, consisting of 20 500-pound bombs. Sometimes they wouldn't drop, so I had to go back and kick them out. I found that very odd. How do you kick out a 500-pound bomb?
Hey, Jesse, tell her with her foot.
How many of y'all were in World War II? So a lot of y'all can identify with this.
Not fireplace.
Okay. The second crewmate's life he saved happened like this. Now I'm going back to his talking. Typically, my position on the airplane during combat was immediately behind that of the operator of the nose turret. I recall one instance in which the location behind the nose turret turned out to be very useful. All the plexiglass which made up the nose turret received an almost direct shell explosion when it was hit by an anti-aircraft missile. The nose gunner found himself sitting on a seat out in the middle of open air. He, of course, was scared to death. I opened the 2 steel doors behind where he was sitting and pulled him into the airplane. Together we were able to close the steel doors at the rear of the turret, and then the 2 of us went back to the safety of the waist area of the airplane. The first combat mission on which my airplane flew was to a factory in northern Italy known as Ploiesti. Okay. The mission, after it was completed, was described to me as what was known as a milk run. A milk run was a term used for a relatively safe mission. This mission was safe to the extent that it was relatively short. As I recall, it was a 9-hour mission for the bombing and return. I didn't consider this a milk run because when I returned back to the base, I counted 77 holes in our airplane. Excuse me. In addition to this first mission to Ploiesti that I mentioned, I participated in a total of 40 combat missions. The length of the missions varied from 9 hours to 12 or 13 hours each. The last combat mission in which I participated was April 26, 1945. So I was in combat duty for 4 to 5 months. But it is a period for me to remember because it was so intense. I had every expectation that I would receive the necessary training to go to Japan and proceed into war activities there. However, while I was in Tampa, the first of 2 atomic bombs were dropped in, I don't know if you call it Hiroshima or Hiroshima. Hiroshima. And the second one in Nagasaki. The Army sent me to the Loop in Chicago where I had been sworn in, put on an active duty, and sent me back home. This was in late September of 1945. I returned to Cairo on a Friday, which gave me just barely enough time to go to Carbondale, which was 60 or so miles away. Southern Illinois University, which is located in Carbondale, began enrollment on Monday, and he was there. My free time consisted of that one weekend. Before the war, I completed only 1 year of my college education. While I was in the service, I got quite a bit of college credit in navigation school. The Air Corps sent me to the University of Cincinnati for a few months where I earned a few college credits. When I arrived at SIU, I was still wearing my uniform because those were the only clothes I had. At this time, soldiers on active duty could wear only their uniform. Wearing civilian clothes was not permitted during this time period of World War II. I wore my uniform for a month or more. My release from duty became official on October 11, 1945. Until then, I had been on terminal leave and still on active duty. This was the end of my time on wartime active duty. But soon after my leave became official, I became a member of the National Guard and of the Air Reserves.